Just curious, what device are you watching on? Phone, TV, laptop? Comment below.
You know how there are those moments in life that freeze everything around you? The kind that make it feel like someone hit mute on the world, and you're just stuck watching in real time while everything you planned and imagined cracks just a little? Well, mine happened in the middle of my own bridal shower, holding a half-warm mimosa with lipstick smudged on the glass and a paper tiara slipping off my head, when my sister Kelsey raised her hand and giggled, "Well, I got a ring too." And just like that, every eye turned to her. I didn't even have time to process what she said. It was like a switch flipped in the room. The chatter shifted. My Aunt Bonnie nearly knocked over the mimosa bar scrambling to get to Kelsey. And my mom let out this high-pitched squeal that I'd only ever heard once. When we told her she was finally going to be a grandmother, suddenly everyone was surrounding her, reaching for her hand, asking how it happened, how long she'd known, what kind of stone it was. I just stood there with my glass, completely invisible, while the decorations I'd spent the past 2 weeks agonizing over, the custom banners, the future Mrs. Cupcake toppers, the Polaroid guestbook station, were utterly ignored. Now look, I'm not the kind of person who needs the spotlight every second. In fact, I'm usually the one dimming it to make others feel more comfortable. But this wasn't just poor timing. This wasn't an accidental overlap or an innocent coincidence. This was calculated. My sister didn't just show up wearing a new ring, she announced it during my toast. Literally. I had just finished thanking everyone for coming and was raising my glass to Adam, my fiancé, when she burst out with it. And that giggle? That was no accident. That giggle was her battle cry. I tried to keep smiling. I really did. I took a sip and forced the corners of my mouth to stay lifted, even though I could feel my face twitching. Adam caught my eye from across the room and gave me this tight little shrug, like even he didn't know what the hell was going on. And that's the worst part. Adam's not dramatic. He's the calm in every storm. But even he looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under him. People started drifting away from the little bride-to-be games I had set up and gathered into smaller clusters, all talking about Kelsey's surprise engagement. She was basking in it. I could see her soaking it up, like she had no clue how it came across, which, if I'm being honest, is her entire brand. That whole, "oops, did I say something I shouldn't have?" shtick she's been working since high school. She's younger than me by 4 years, but ever since she turned 21, it's like she's been playing at being my equal. Same makeup, same hair color, even tried to intern at the same company I worked at before I caught her fudging parts of her resume. And now, here we were, standing in the same living room, both wearing engagement rings. Only I was supposed to be the one being celebrated. The rest of the shower was a blur. I vaguely remember Grandma June muttering something under her breath as she reached for another deviled egg. Probably something about how some girls just can't stand not being the center of attention. Grandma doesn't sugarcoat anything, bless her, but everyone else kept pretending like this was cute. Like it was just so sweet that the sisters were engaged together. The word double wedding even floated through the air at one point, and I swear I nearly choked on a cherry tomato. I laughed it off, made some joke about how Adam wasn't the type to share the altar, and moved on. But the seed had been planted. And Kelsey, she was watching me closely, waiting for a reaction I wasn't going to give her. Later that night, after the last of the decorations had been torn down, and my mom had insisted on packing every leftover pastry into Tupperware like we were going to war, I sat on the couch with Adam in silence. I didn't even have the energy to vent. I just opened my laptop, logged into our shared wedding planning drive, and without even blinking, removed Kelsey's access to everything. She was supposed to be my maid of honor, but now she was something else entirely, and I wasn't going to give her front row seats to whatever came next. Adam glanced at me from the other side of the couch. "You okay?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stared at the guest list spreadsheet. All those neatly organized names and addresses, color-coded RSVPs, little check marks for plus ones. It all suddenly felt flimsy, like the foundation had shifted and I was the only one who noticed. "I will be," I finally said, because I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let my sister think she'd won anything. Not yet. In the days that followed the bridal shower, I tried my best to talk myself out of the burning suspicion that had started crawling into the back of my head like a slow, stubborn parasite. Because surely no one, not even Kelsey, would intentionally use her own sister's shower to launch her engagement like some kind of missile aimed at the heart of everything I'd spent months building. But then again, the signs began stacking up like bricks in a wall I hadn't asked for, but suddenly had no choice but to stand behind. At first, I clung to denial with both hands, repeating to myself that maybe she'd truly just been caught in the emotion of the day. Maybe Jake had proposed right before they arrived and she didn't know what to do with it. Maybe it was one of those impulsive, messy, genuine moments that just happened without intent, without strategy, without an ounce of malice. But that theory collapsed the moment I got the notification that she'd booked her bridal appointment at the exact same boutique I had picked for my wedding dress fitting, down to the day and hour, as if the entire city didn't have half a dozen other salons that could have accommodated her. I called the boutique to confirm, my heart pounding in a way that felt both childish and justified. And when the girl on the phone casually said, "Oh yeah, Kelsey's your sister, right? She said she wanted to come in first so she could surprise you with her pick." I swear my jaw clenched so tight I could hear the echo in my ears. That was when I realized this wasn't about excitement or coincidence. This was about control. And not just control over her own moment, but over mine. Still, I didn't react publicly. I let the silence do the talking. I went to my own fitting 2 days later, smiled for the pictures, said yes to a dress I genuinely loved, and posted a carefully curated carousel on Instagram that showed nothing but calm, joy, and poise. I made no mention of Kelsey, made no dig, no passive-aggressive captions, not even a reaction when she posted her dress-fitting photos the next morning, complete with a tagged location and the same mirror I'd stood in front of 48 hours prior. It was so blatant it almost tipped over into parody, but none of our mutual friends seemed to notice. Or worse, maybe they did and didn't care, which somehow felt even more humiliating. Things really started to spiral 2 weeks later when I opened the group chat we'd made for the bridesmaids, originally meant to help coordinate dresses, events, and travel plans, and found it flooded with messages about a joint bachelorette weekend, a term I hadn't seen, spoken, or agreed to in any form. Kelsey, in her usual syrupy tone, had proposed that we make it easier on everyone by doing a combined celebration, something fun and beachy. And while half the group responded with enthusiastic emojis and fake excited phrases like, "OMG, that would be so cute," I sat there scrolling in disbelief, rereading the messages as if my brain had misfired and shown me someone else's thread. I didn't respond immediately, choosing instead to text my best friend Sasha privately, asking her if I was losing my mind, or if this felt a little too familiar. Her response, blessedly blunt as always, was short and to the point. "Your sister is a social parasite. Block her from the planning." It was around then that Adam, who up until that point had tried to stay out of it, because he honestly believed Kelsey was just a little thoughtless, not malicious, finally admitted that things were getting weird. We were eating takeout on the couch when I showed him the message thread, and he looked up from his noodles with an expression I hadn't seen since the day his ex-girlfriend had RSVP'd to our engagement party with a +1 that turned out to be his former roommate. His exact words were, "Yeah, no, this is officially weird." But still, I didn't do anything rash. I didn't block her, didn't confront her, didn't even reply to the group chat. I let the idea float into the void. Instead, I threw myself deeper into the planning of my own wedding, quietly adjusting details, meeting with vendors, making decisions without looping in Kelsey, without asking for her opinion, and most importantly, without giving her any more access to the documents I had once so naively shared with her in the name of sisterhood and excitement. Then came the message that tipped everything over. It was a simple screenshot, sent by accident, or so I assume, from my mom, meant for my Aunt Linda, but forwarded to me in what I can only describe as the universe's own sense of justice. In the screenshot, I saw a conversation between Kelsey and my mother, along with a few of my cousins and aunts, discussing how poetic it would be if the sisters shared a wedding date, how it would be twice the love in one day, and most notably, how Kelsey had already booked her venue for the same Saturday I was set to get married. I stared at the message for a long time, not moving, not breathing, just processing every word with the slow horror of someone watching a train approach and realizing they're standing on the tracks. When I finally looked up, Adam was on the other side of the room, scrolling through emails, oblivious, and I quietly said his name. He looked up and I handed him my phone. He read the screenshot, blinked a few times, and then said, in that careful way he uses when he's trying not to add fuel to my already growing rage, "That's not real, is it?" But it was real. It was painfully, grotesquely real. Kelsey had chosen my date. She had booked a venue, sent a save the date to some people behind my back, and had the audacity to make it look like it was all some whimsical coincidence born out of love and sisterhood, rather than the single most manipulative move I'd ever witnessed in our entire history of competing, comparing, and clashing over everything from Halloween costumes to boyfriends. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't even talk much. I just sat in bed with my laptop, logged into our wedding website, and began making changes that only a handful of people would notice, at least for now. I updated the date. I changed the RSVP page to a private link with a password. I called our planner the next morning and moved the venue reservation up by exactly 1 week. It wasn't drastic, it wasn't loud, it was just enough. Enough to get ahead of the chaos. Enough to reclaim what had always been mine. And then I waited. Not because I needed to see her reaction immediately, but because I knew that when she finally saw the updated date and realized what I'd done, the game she thought she was winning would suddenly shift. And when it did, I'd be ready, because if she wanted war, she should have remembered who taught her how to throw the first punch and make it look like an accident. It's a strange sort of clarity that comes with betrayal when it stops surprising you. When the shock wears off, when the hurt doesn't gut you anymore, but instead sharpens into something cool and purposeful, like a needle threading its way through everything you thought was safe. By the time I'd quietly changed the wedding date and locked down the RSVPs with a new password, I wasn't angry anymore, not in the loud, fiery way that comes with sudden heartbreak, but in the low, simmering kind of way that makes you move smarter, quieter, and with a long memory. It had only been 3 days since I made the changes. 3 long, quiet, passive-aggressive days where I answered texts with short delays, ignored Kelsey's sudden bursts of sisterly affection in the group chat, and said nothing when she shared photos of her engagement shoot that looked suspiciously similar to the concept I'd discussed months ago in the same chat. Same field, same golden hour lighting, even the same dumb chalkboard sign that read, "She said yes," in the exact font I had spent an entire Saturday choosing. Still, I said nothing. Not yet. Then on a Thursday afternoon around 4, I got a call from my mom. Her voice had that breathless tone she gets when she's trying not to sound like she's caught between 2 daughters about to go full Hunger Games on each other. And she opened with something like, "Okay, now before you get upset," which, of course, is the international warning sign for incoming nonsense. She told me Kelsey had picked a venue. I already knew that, obviously. What I didn't know, or rather hadn't had confirmed until that moment, was that it was less than 10 miles from mine. And yes, it was for the same Saturday. I stayed silent while she rambled, saying something about how Kelsey didn't realize it was the same date, that maybe she got confused, or maybe she was hoping we could turn it into a double celebration, and wasn't it just such a fun idea to have 2 weddings, 2 receptions, and 1 big family day? I let her talk until she ran out of breath, and then I calmly told her we had moved our date. I didn't say why. I didn't even acknowledge the double wedding comment. I just stated the new date like it was the most natural thing in the world, like I hadn't spent the last 2 nights awake in bed rehearsing how I'd say it without tipping my hand. There was silence on the other end, followed by a stuttered, "Oh?" and then a weak, "Well, that's kind of sudden." I didn't offer an explanation. I simply told her the new details, said we'd updated the site and sent private invites, and that I hoped she'd be able to make it, I knew she would. My mom might be a chronic fence sitter, but deep down, she knew exactly what Kelsey had done, and she hated confrontation just enough to pretend she didn't see it, so long as it didn't directly impact her reputation. The next morning, it happened. Kelsey, bless her predictable little soul, finally logged into the wedding website and saw the change. I know this because 5 minutes later, she called me 5 times in a row, and then started texting like her thumbs were on fire. Her messages were all variations of outrage and faux confusion, starting with, "Wait, did you change your date?" and escalating quickly to, "Why would you do that without telling me?" followed by the cherry on top, "Are you seriously trying to compete with me?" I didn't respond. I let each message sit there, hanging in the air like unanswered prayers, while I turned my phone over and went back to reviewing floral contracts with my planner, who, bless her own passive-aggressive heart, had already started labeling Kelsey as the other bride in our notes. Later that evening, after hours of silent treatment had clearly frayed her patience, Kelsey finally sent the big one, the nuclear option she'd clearly been holding in her back pocket like a cursed little secret. "You know, Jake and I might be pregnant, so maybe you should consider pushing yours back again." I stared at the message for a long time, not because I believed it, because I didn't, but because it was such a perfectly transparent move that it almost impressed me. I could practically hear her smug little voice behind the text, imagining herself as the star of this strange little drama she was writing in real time, believing, as always, that everyone else would just fall in line behind her storyline. I still didn't respond, not a single word. Instead, I went over to Adam, handed him my phone, and asked him to read the text without saying anything. He did. He scrolled slowly, then faster, then stopped and looked at me with a raised eyebrow, like he was waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I just poured myself a glass of wine, sat down next to him, and said, "I think she finally figured out I'm not playing her game anymore." Adam nodded, clearly relieved that we weren't about to cancel our wedding just to make space for whatever tornado Kelsey was trying to stir up. Over the next few days, the fallout was fascinating. Kelsey, realizing her text had fallen into a black hole, started calling other people, our mom, our grandma, even a couple of my friends, spinning the narrative that I had changed the date to spite her, or because I was jealous she was having a moment too. But here's the thing, when you build your life on little lies and borrowed moments, eventually people start to notice the cracks. And the cracks were beginning to show. Grandma June, who had been quiet through most of the chaos, finally broke her silence at a family brunch the following Sunday. With one slow sip of her coffee and that dry, unfiltered tone of hers, she looked right at my mom and said, "You know, Kelsey's been playing dress-up with Megan's life since she figured out how to talk." My mother nearly choked on her mimosa. I, on the other hand, nearly clapped. What no one seemed to understand, what Kelsey herself never fully grasped, was that I wasn't trying to steal anything back. I wasn't fighting to reclaim some spotlight or prove a point about whose love story mattered more. I had already gotten the one thing she never could fake or fabricate: real peace, real love, real plans that didn't need a performance to feel special. Kelsey had confused attention for affection for so long that she couldn't tell the difference anymore. So no, I didn't tell her about the new date. And no, I wasn't going to adjust my timeline for her pregnancy drama, fake or otherwise. Because while she was busy staging moments, I was quietly building one she couldn't touch. And the best part? She knew it. There's a specific kind of silence that descends after a well-executed move. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, not in the least, but charged with all the invisible consequences that haven't quite surfaced yet. Like the tension in the air before a thunderstorm you know is going to rip the sky open, but you have no idea when or how loud it's going to be. That was the kind of quiet that settled over everything in the week after Kelsey discovered the wedding date had changed. The kind where no one said anything directly, but suddenly the family group chats were suspiciously still. The phone didn't ring with just checking in calls from our mother, and social media posts became more passive-aggressive than usual. More curated, more intentional, like each of us was drawing a line in digital sand, waiting to see who would cross it first. Kelsey, of course, didn't handle the silence well, because if there's one thing she's always needed like oxygen, it's an audience. when her initial barrage of texts went unanswered. She switched tactics, and I started hearing secondhand through friends and distant cousins that she was concerned about me, that she wasn't sure what had gotten into Megan lately, and that she just wanted things to feel special for both of us, as if the entire sequence of events hadn't been a slow-moving demolition of every boundary I'd set. It was almost impressive, the way she twisted reality so quickly, rebranding herself as the wounded party in a conflict she had engineered from the start, as though this wasn't a one-woman campaign to hijack the most meaningful experience of my adult life, but rather a simple misunderstanding between sisters who'd let wedding stress get in the way of love. The real boiling point came not from her, but from the family members caught in the middle, those poor souls who hadn't yet realized you can't remain neutral in a war that's been designed to divide you, because eventually the silence becomes a choice, and that choice becomes a side, whether you want it to or not. I noticed it first in the RSVP responses. When we changed the date and sent out the new private invitations, we included a note making it clear that we understood the inconvenience of the adjustment and that we'd appreciate discretion while the family navigated logistics. It was polite, it was subtle, and it was designed above all else to expose loyalty. The responses trickled in, at first predictably, close friends, college roommates, Adam's family, the ones who'd never been on the fence to begin with. But then came the ones that surprised me. Aunt Linda, who'd always played peacemaker but marked attending without hesitation. Cousin Matthew and his wife, who had declined Kelsey's engagement party citing travel conflicts, suddenly made a donation to our honeymoon fund with a note that simply read, "You deserve this." Even Uncle Gary, who rarely showed up to anything unless there was an open bar, RSVP'd yes with 3 exclamation points and a message about how he was proud to support the bride who plays by the rules. But the real moment, the one that made me pause, close my laptop, and just breathe for a minute, came when Grandma June called me from her landline, the one she only uses for real conversations, the one that always crackles slightly when she's standing too close to the microwave. She didn't open with a greeting. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She just said, with the quiet finality of someone who's been alive long enough to see every type of family dysfunction play out in full color, "I'm going to your wedding, Megan. And I don't care who doesn't like it." It's funny how the smallest sentence, said in the right tone, can feel like an earthquake. That moment shifted something in me, not just because it was Grandma choosing a side, though that mattered, maybe more than I wanted to admit, but because it was the first time I felt like someone saw exactly what had happened and refused to sugarcoat it for the sake of politeness or family harmony. She didn't need details. She didn't need proof. She had been around long enough to know that when people show you who they are, you believe them, even if they're your granddaughter. Of course, Kelsey didn't take the dwindling guest list quietly. She did what she always does when control starts slipping through her fingers. She created a distraction. This time, it came in the form of a Facebook post, complete with a blurry ultrasound photo and a caption that read, "Some surprises come in pairs," followed by a winky face and the tag "had baby on board." It was subtle enough to be deniable, yet dramatic enough to detonate the family chat into chaos. People congratulated her in droves. Some texted me directly, awkwardly trying to confirm if it was true. My mother called and left a voicemail that was a master class in emotional gymnastics, saying something like, "I know this must be hard for you, but we should be happy for both of you. And Kelsey needs our support right now more than ever." I didn't respond to her either. I wasn't going to play that game. The truth is, I didn't believe Kelsey was pregnant. Not really. I had known her too long, seen too many of her grand declarations evaporate when the attention waned, to take something like that at face value. But even if it were true, even if she had somehow wrapped her manipulation in biology this time, it didn't change the fact that she had crossed every line imaginable in the pursuit of one-upping me. I wasn't going to derail my life just to accommodate her delusions. Still, it hurt. Of course it did. Not because I wanted to be pregnant, not because I envied her, but because every time she took another piece of this experience and made it about her, it felt like my wedding was being chipped away at by 1,000 tiny cuts I couldn't even defend against without looking like the bad guy. That's the trick of people like Kelsey. They force you into a corner where any reaction looks like overreaction, where silence is the only armor you have left. So I leaned into it. I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. I stopped trying to balance the emotional ledger that had always tilted in her favor. I finalized the last of the wedding plans without her. I picked the songs, the seating chart, the colors, and the favors without asking for input or permission. I sent the final head count to the caterers, confident that I was only inviting people who wanted to be there, not people who felt obligated by blood or guilt. And on the night before the wedding, when I sat alone with Adam in the dim light of our living room, going over the schedule one last time, he took my hand, looked at me with the same calm certainty he always had, and said, "I know it wasn't what you pictured, but this is going to be ours. All of it. Just ours." And for the first time in months, I believed him. It's a strange sensation, walking into the final day of a long-fought battle, without the usual noise of victory or the bitterness of loss. Just the quiet certainty that, for better or worse, everything that needed to happen has already been set in motion, that all the lines have been drawn, crossed, redrawn, and finally abandoned by those who grew too tired or too proud to keep pretending there was still a middle to stand on. The morning of my wedding arrived not with fanfare or nerves, but with a kind of stillness I hadn't known I needed until I woke up next to it. The house was silent, the sun slid through the blinds like honey, and for the first time in months, I didn't check my phone the second my eyes opened, because I already knew, without a doubt, that nothing on that screen could ruin what I had built. The ceremony was small by modern standards, not because we couldn't have filled more chairs, but because I no longer had the energy to invite people whose loyalty felt like a negotiation. Every single guest seated in that venue had chosen to be there with no pressure, no obligation, no shame-laced phone call from a mother trying to avoid confrontation. And that, more than anything, made the air feel lighter. There was laughter, genuine, unforced laughter, during the vows, tears that didn't feel rehearsed, and a warmth that spread from person to person, like the quiet kind of joy that doesn't need to announce itself to be real. Adam looked at me during the ceremony in that way he always did when he needed no words. Just a squeeze of the hand, a soft glance, a shared breath. And I realized in that exact moment that everything that had come before, all the chaos and betrayal and mind games, had been leading me not to a breaking point, but to this, to him, to this moment. And I smiled, not because I was putting on a show for anyone, but because for once, everything was exactly as it should have been. Of course, Kelsey didn't come. I hadn't expected her to, not after the last message she sent me. An oddly composed email that read more like a legal statement than a note from a sister, outlining how devastated she was by my behavior, how I had intentionally hurt her by excluding her from my plans, and how moving forward, she was choosing to establish healthy boundaries. It would have been almost laughable if it hadn't been so depressingly familiar. Kelsey rewriting the story in her favor, claiming victimhood with the same breath she used to orchestrate every emotional ambush since we were children. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. The reception was held in a converted greenhouse, the kind with twinkling lights tangled around ivy-covered beams and the scent of jasmine hanging so thick in the air you could almost taste it. People danced. The food was gone within an hour. The speeches were mercifully short. And for the first time since the engagement, I felt like I could finally exhale. My feet hurt from the heels I had stubbornly insisted on wearing despite every warning. My hair was already frizzing at the temples from the humidity, and my face ached from hours of smiling. Not the performative kind, but the kind that makes your cheek muscles sore because it's honest and constant and just a little overwhelming in the best way. It wasn't until later in the night, when the music slowed and the crowd began to thin, that the final twist came, not with drama or disruption, but in the form of a single, unexpected message that appeared on my phone as I was sitting alone by the cake table, trying to give my heels a rest and take in the moment. The message was from Jake. At first, I thought it might be a mistake. The preview just showed my name and an attached file, which felt suspicious enough to make my stomach flip, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. The body of the message was short. 3 words, in fact. You were right. Below it, a single screenshot. A conversation thread, time-stamped the week before Kelsey had announced her engagement. The contact name had been saved as B, and the messages left little room for interpretation. Kelsey had been texting her ex. Flirty, familiar, overlapping timelines that confirmed what I had always suspected, but never had the proof to say aloud. That her engagement had been a reaction, not a decision. A move in a game she thought I was playing, one she couldn't stand to lose. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not angry, not even surprised, but struck by the weight of the validation I never asked for but always wanted. Not because I needed to expose her, not because I needed a win, but because somewhere deep down, part of me still wanted confirmation that I hadn't imagined all of it, that the cruelty hadn't been in my head, that the manipulation had been real, and that I had been right to walk away. Adam found me a few minutes later and asked if everything was okay. I showed him the message without a word. He read it, looked at me with an expression that was part amusement, part exhaustion, and then asked the one question I hadn't even thought about. Are you going to say anything? I thought about it, considered replying, considered forwarding it to our mother, considered sharing it with someone, anyone, who might finally see the full picture and stop pretending this was a two-sided misunderstanding. But then I looked around at the lights, the faces still dancing, the laughter echoing softly against the glass, and I realized that the best part of finally being at peace is that you no longer feel the urge to reopen old wounds just to prove they bled. So I deleted the message. Not because she deserved forgiveness, and not because I was taking the high road in some noble display of maturity, but because I had finally learned the difference between letting someone go and letting them keep living in your head rent-free. The night ended with a slow dance under the canopy of lights. Just me and Adam, barefoot and breathless, no announcements, no speeches, no surprises. Just the music, the warmth of his arms around me, and the quiet knowledge that we had done it. Not just survived the chaos, but stepped right through it into something better. And as the song faded and the applause rippled softly through the remaining guests, I leaned into his chest, closed my eyes, and thought, not with anger, but with a strange, settled calm, that Kelsey never really stole my spotlight. She just never figured out how to make her own.